Who's the greatest chess player of all times? Opinions vary, and it's hard to compare modern GMs with famous players of the past because of the rating inflation. I once saw an interesting analysis when someone tried to adjust ratings based on the inflation rate and compare all of those greatest players, and here's the list of the top players who ever lived on this planet according to that analysis. Now, of course, this subject is still very tricky, but nevertheless, today we're going to have a look at the game of Bobby Fischer, who played a complete perfect chess game. He played like Stockfish back in 1970 when Stockfish did not exist. And that's quite a remarkable accomplishment because Stockfish rating is over 3,500. Okay, well, it opens up with pawn to b3, and Fischer's playing white against Meking, playing black. Black continues with pawn to d5, bishop b2. By the way, that's quite an interesting opening as white. If you're part of the Igor Nation, you know that I've got videos about that, and it's a pretty cool opening for blitz. You will see now one of the main plans about this opening, which Fischer executed. After c5, here Fischer played knight to f3, and here's the fun fact. Knight f3 is basically the only move that Stockfish doesn't like about this game, saying that white should have started from e3 first and then play knight f3. But if such a subtle nuance is the only thing that Stockfish could not like about the game, you can just assume the overall quality of the game, because that's such a subtle nuance which is, I mean, probably doesn't make that much difference. It's a book move anyway. Anyway, after knight f3 and knight c6, Fischer played e3, and after knight f6, white plays bishop to b5, beating the knight down to the king. Like goes bishop d7 to interfere with his own bishop. White castles. Like goes pawn e6. Here comes pawn d3. Now, of course, instead of d3, white could have played d4, turn it into a more standard queen's gambit position, but d3 is actually part of white's plan here. White has this dark square bishop putting pressure along this diagonal, and therefore white wants to keep it open. And we'll see why in a moment. Black played bishop e7, and now white trades off this knight on c6. Now, in most cases, you do not want to force an exchange of your bishop for your opponent's knight, but in this case, this bishop on b5 has no other purpose anyway. Plus, after this exchange, you can land your knight on e5, which is one of the really cool things about this line. Now, from e5, you threaten to grab there and double his pawns, and overall, this knight controls a bunch of squares, puts pressure, and that's cool. So far, black decided to prevent this possible exchange and played rook c8. White played knight d2, still leaving the long diagonal open for the bishop. Black castles, and here white goes pawn f4. And that's basically the setup that you want to aim at while playing this opening. If you can get it, that gives you quite promising position for the middle game, because thanks to this pawn on f4, you've got more space there on the king side. You've got possible rook lift over here, putting pressure together with the bishop, and that overall creates nice attacking opportunities. Now, black was annoyed by this knight and decided to trade it off by going knight d7, offering an exchange of knights. And you know that to take is a mistake, therefore you did not want to force exchanges by yourself unless that gives you a certain specific advantage. And here Fischer noticed the drawback of his opponent's move, that the knight from f6 no longer controlled the square, and he played queen to g4. He took advantage of this little change of the position right away. Now, from g4, the queen adds up to this attack against the g7 square, actually preparing already after the knight trades off, you know, all kinds of checkmates with queen takes g7. Anyway, black traded off the knight. Now queen takes g7 threat is real, so black played bishop to f6. Now, at this point, the position looks more or less equal. It's still not clear what can white do to renew threats to your opponent's king, and it's nice to see how Fischer gradually expanded his position and created more and more pressure onto black. And here Fischer played a move which I like in particular, because assuming that black is going to trade off here, it could be tempting for white to play knight f3 and overprotect the bishop that way. But although knight f3 would be an option, that doesn't allow white really to attack after that. And Fischer played a smarter move, rook to f3. He anticipates black to trade there on the e5, which would open up the f-file, and given this fact, he's ready to double down on the f-file with rook f1, putting pressure there. So that's part of the plan, and it kind of makes it less appealing for black to trade there, because now, thanks to this rook, and white is already ready to stack rooks there, that kind of favors white's attack, right? Now, therefore, instead of that, black just played queen e7, and white played rook f1. Here, black didn't really know what to do and played a5. I mean, it's not that easy for black to figure out what to do, but on the other hand, from the white side, he doesn't have any threats yet anyway. But Fischer here played rook g3, and it turns out that there is a pretty beautiful threat. The threat is queen takes g7. in the game. Black noticed it. Black player is a grandmaster. He's a strong player. He noticed and he covered that. But just to show you an idea, if let's say black does nothing and just plays a4, something else, then white could unleash this queen takes g7 sacrifice, which would be a pretty beautiful finish of the game. Rook takes, check to the king. The rook is supported. Therefore, the king has to go. Now rook takes f7, and this is a discover check. The king still has to move. Now rook takes e7, and white gobbled up a bunch of material and is now having a completely winning game. Since white managed to create this tremendous pressure against the g7 pawn, black decided that it's time to simplify matters. He traded on e5, now queen takes g7 is still a threat, and he played pawn to f5. Trying to attack this queen, and also now the queen from e7 guards this pawn. Now white took en passant, rook takes on f6, and here many players would just trade on f6, which is wrong. That would lead to an about equal game. But Fischer found a little tactical trick which helps him to seize an advantage. He trades on g7. And after queen takes, certainly white does not want to take here. After king takes g7, black is just up a rook. Instead, Fischer took here on f6. And temporarily looks like black is having an extra queen, but the queen is pinned down to the king. Therefore, white would grab this queen anyway, and as the dust settles, you can see that white managed to win a pawn. That pawn that used to be on g7 is now gone. Apart from that, now white is also attacking the other pawn on e6, and black defended it by going rook to e8. Here Fischer played another move which I like particularly about this game. Lots of players would probably try to move the knight forward with knight of 3e5 or something like this, but Fischer actually used prophylactic thinking to determine what his opponent is going to do and how to stop that. Because if white goes knight of 3, which he didn't in the game, black would probably play king g7 to push back this annoying rook from f6, and it indeed has to go back to f4, and white is still up a pawn, but black managed to a little bit improve his position. So let's take it back. Instead, Fischer played g4. And now, if this rook is ever attacked, Fischer is ready to push the pawn forward and defend it. Therefore, the rook can stay on its active position and keep annoying black. So that's pretty cool. g4, a little pawn move, but it makes a big difference. Black played a4, just trying to do something because he can't do much. Now white goes knight of 3. Ideally, he wants to put this knight on e5. That would be really cool for white. After that, black would be completely blocked. Black traded pawns on b3 and played king g7, but as we already know, white can maintain this great position for the rook by going pawn g5. And now white wants to go knight e5, and after that black will be like completely locked there back without being able to move almost at all. So black tried to play e5 himself, giving more space for his pieces. But now once again Fischer noticed a little new weakness in his opponent's position, that due to the pawn being on e5, not e6, this square f5 is no longer covered. And he repositioned his knight there from h4 to f5 to attack the king and to advance overall. So again, pretty little nuance, but again, he made use of that to improve his position. In order to cover the f5 square, black played bishop d7 so that he's ready to trade, but now these pawns and this bishop are a little bit more hanging, and once again Fischer makes use of that by going rook d6. Double attack, black has to cover, and now although black managed to temporarily cover his position, to avoid any immediate losses, but he's completely paralyzed. Basically, the king can't go forward, right? Our knight and pawn controls all these squares. The bishop has to guard this square, the rook has to guard the bishop, so basically nothing can really move. And Fischer was just playing king f2, so he doesn't have to hurry, since his opponent is in trouble anyway and is almost paralyzed. He can just bring the king closer to the center, which is a nice idea for the endgame. Black played king f7 just as well, rook b6. This time, white is hitting this pawn. Black guarded it with rook to e7, and now Fischer plays pawn e4. So from here, this pawn also controls this square, and at any point in the future, white will be able to play knight f5 there, which might be quite annoying for black, since given the fact that this pawn defends it. Black decided to trade there, and then he played c4, which is actually a great move by black, and it's a great idea to remember overall. If you are a defending side on an endgame, you do wish to trade off pawns, because quite often if you can reach the position, let's say at the end, where you've got a king and your opponent has a king and a knight, then it is still a draw despite of your opponent having an extra knight, right? So trading off pawns is a good defensive strategy, but Fischer shutted it down by going b4. So he's an attacker side, he wants to win, therefore he wants to avoid exchanges. Now black played bishop g4, which doesn't really do much. White played king f3, centralizing the king, rook d7, and now once again Fischer noticed that for the second, black weakened defense of this pawn on e5 because the rook relocated here, and he uses this thing instantaneously by going g6 check. And it turns out that black can't really recapture this pawn. In the game he played king e8, because if black took this, after knight to g6 they can't defend this pawn on e5. And after that, that's gonna be a triple fork actually to all of black's available pieces, which is nice. So let's take it back. In the game, instead of taking, black decided to move the king back, but that didn't change the situation that much, because white just forced that exchange himself, and now knight g6 still comes with a check and a double attack to this pawn. So after king e8, knight takes e5, that's yet another fork, this time to the bishop and this pawn. After bishop c8, knight takes c4, white grabbed one more pawn, now he's 3 pawns up, and after a few more moves, black just resigned. Here in this position, black resigned, thanks to 3 extra pawns, while I'll just move them forward and promote one of them into a new queen. So that's what a perfect chess game is, and I hope that you could enjoy it as much as I did. When I run the chess.com review of this game, it shows 97.5 accuracy for white, but in reality, if you give Stockfish more time to think, it actually agrees that Fischer's moves were actually better or just equal alternatives. So I would say that it is still a perfect chess game. Now, if you want to learn yourself how to improve your own positional understanding, then you probably know that I'm a big proponent of general principles that allow you to find proper moves in any positions, and I got it covered in this free masterclass that you can check it out right here. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.